It's episode 180 of the Author Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner.
You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com, and I really appreciate it if you'd go over and click on the subscribe button over in the right-hand sidebar. It helps other people find the show. I'd like to thank our sponsors this week. ThirdScribe.com is there to connect you, writers and readers, together. If you are a writer, you know that you need an author platform. You need a place where people can find you, read your books, buy your books, connect with you, and the same thing with readers. You can connect with some of your favorite authors at ThirdScribe.com. Please tell them that Hank sent you. Also, the new book by Aaron Saylor, Sewerville, a Southern gangster novel. It's like The Sopranos in Appalachia. Rises at times to lyrical beauty, says author Mark Rubenstein. A small-time hood tries to escape the family business in this powerful story of crime and drug abuse in rural America. Sewerville is violent and profane, but in the end, it's also deeply moving. Considered an essential tale of modern crime in the American South. Pick it up on Amazon.com. There's a link in the show notes. I'd also like to thank Daniel Arthur Smith and the great folks at Tales from the Canyons of the Dam. There's a brand new episode out. Go pick it up today. Click on the link to Ed Gosney's blog over in the right-hand sidebar. Cool comics in my collection. And go check out what Ed is doing. He's doing some fantastic work over there. And let him know that you heard about him on Author Stories. Also, if you're an author, there has been a lot of talk lately about changes to Amazon's algorithms and the way that they handle certain things. Now might be a good time for you to consider taking your book wide to as many retailers as possible. Draft to Digital can help you do that. Go to drafttodigital.com/author stories and see how they can help you take your book to as many people as possible. I'm going to do a special live YouTube hangout with Kevin Tumlinson from Draft to Digital, and we're going to talk about taking your book wide and answering your questions and all sorts of fun stuff there. There's going to be a link to that live event down in the show notes. Go ahead and set your calendar for it. Don't forget to stay tuned after the episode for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' Jason Crane series. Now on to our show. Six String, the new book by Stefan Boltz. Jennifer Dalton dreamed of being a singer for as long as she could remember. The dream has kept her alive throughout a childhood mired in poverty in a broken and abusive home. When her younger brother dies and her mother takes refuge in alcohol, the emotional toll becomes unbearable. One morning she runs away, taking with her the one thing she owns, her beloved six-string guitar. This is the story of a girl finding herself alone in the good and the bad, the friends she makes, and a choice that could rob her of everything she's won.
Six String by Stefan Boltz, now available on Amazon.com.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today is episode, I guess this is going to be 180 that we're recording today. There's been a lot of these shows. I was reflecting this morning on a lot of them that I've done. I've made lots of friends because of this show, and that's one of those things you can't exactly quantify when you're weighing the cost of some of the things that you do. And a couple of the friends that I've made lately are Steve Beaulieu and Aaron Hall. And did I pronounce your last name right?
Well,
Steve?
it's actually Hale, Aaron Hale. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally joking. But my last name is Beaulieu. It's French and weird. There's this fake R at the end of it.
Yeah, so welcome to the show, Steve.
Yeah, you just go with Steve. That works.
Oh, but yeah, you know, I've been reflecting lately on just kind of where this show has taken me and all of the different relationships, and it's just funny how these things happen that you never plan on. And I'm so happy to have met you guys recently, and I'm really impressed with the work that you're putting out. But we can't get into all that yet because we know, the folks that listen to the show, that we begin each show with a question. And that question is, I'm going to start with you, Steve, and then we'll hand it to Aaron. But what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
First memory, I picked up, let's see, it would have been The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore, and I don't even know how old I was, if I'm honest. You know what? I'm wrong. That is not my first memory. You're jogging all kinds of greatness this morning. My first memory was I read The Pilgrim's Progress. You remember that story?
Oh, of course.
I read that and immediately jumped on my computer. This was an old Tandy 1000 from Radio Shack.
Was that a TX, SX, TL, SL, HX?
We're just going to go with that. Yeah. But I sat down and I remember it had a word processor and then it had this like drawing art program, really trashy blue and yellow screen. And I remember writing a story that was probably far too similar to Pilgrim's Progress. But I must have been, I'm serious, maybe 9 years old. And I can't believe I hadn't thought about this until just now. And that sparked my memory. And I remember I actually drew up the book cover. It was terrible. It was like some kid with a backpack or something. But yeah, that was my first memory. Probably 9 years old. I showed it to my mom. She asked me if I plagiarized it. She's actually asked me that just about everything I've ever written from that day till now.
Did you copy it, Steve?
I think it started with I hope that she was impressed with it. That's my hope. That she was impressed, and she's like, "Did you copy this from somewhere?" And I said no, which I hope was true.
Nice.
No offense to Mrs. Beaulieu for my impression.
Yeah, it's okay. That was spot on impression.
What about you, Aaron? What's your first memory?
Really, mine started early in grade school. I remember writing a story in first grade about Tarzan, and it was a pretty violent story. And it was he fought the apes in the jungle. Are apes even in the jungle?
I don't know.
I don't know anything about animals.
You think you're a writer.
Yeah, I guess
you didn't research that one.
So they were running guns, and so Tarzan, goes and fights them. And so I was forced to rewrite the story by my teacher, and to make it more friendly, Tarzan ended up having to cook them dinner. And they even called in my parents and everything. So that is my first memory of being a storyteller, is being censored early in grade school.
Wow.
And then
that's epic.
I also I had severe dyslexia and dysgraphia, and the cure, according to my elementary school, was instead of going to PE every day, they put me in a little closet kind of room and said, write a story. And so for years, instead of playing dodgeball and whatever else with the kids, I sat in this room 5 days a week and just wrote stories. And sometimes I wonder sometimes I wonder if not for that, would I have turned out the storyteller that I am. So I don't know. That's probably my earliest memories right there.
Yeah, you could have been a professional
exactly.
You could dodge a wrench.
You never know.
You could dodge a wrench.
So that goes into nature versus nurture. Could you have been nurtured into a professional dodgeball player? We'll never know.
I'm glad that we'll never know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've told the story many times. I'm sure people are sick of hearing it, but I had severe dyslexia as well. And comic books were the thing that really helped me to work around that. Because when I was in elementary school in the 70s, nobody really knew what to do with you when you had stuff wrong with you. But my mom gave me some comic books, and those things really kind of helped me to work around some of those issues. So I love hearing from other people that are dyslexic and are now, writers and people that are prolific and work around that. I always love to hear those kinds of things.
If your mom would have thought about it, she might have bought you a manga book because you read that backwards.
Right. Exactly. Or, that's a common misconception is that you read things backwards sometimes, but it's more like you rip all of the pages out and you throw them up in the air and you just grab them at random. And it's kind of more like that. I begin with that question because it seems like a random question, but like you said, when you really start trying to get back to that early thing, that kind of the spark that started it all, it really does bring up all these wonderful memories, and it kind of reminds us of why we do what we do. So you had this, both of you guys had this early exposure to storytelling. Steve, what was it for you? Because we rarely take a linear path from that early memory to published author. Usually it's, we jump over here, we do this for a while, we collect life experiences over here, and those things kind of morph us into writers. What did you do to get to the point where you are now? What career did you pursue, and was storytelling always something in the back of your mind?
Well, what's interesting is if I think about, I've been involved in 37 fields of employment in my lifetime. That's not an exaggeration. I figured it out before. It's scary, but I've always been a guy that. I never actually realized it until now. Again, your spark, Hank. You are like bringing up great memories of mine.
He is.
Everything I've ever done well has been a form of storytelling. At an early age, I gave up playing sports around 11 because I bought my first guitar, and I've been a songwriter ever since. So, in essence, songwriting is telling stories, and then. Through years of touring and things of that with the band, I listened to the voice of God who told me we're done here with music, at least in the venue that I was doing it, and I pursued the calling on my life, being a pastor, which, of course, being a pastor is a whole lot of storytelling as well. And so between those two things, I don't know that I ever really stopped telling stories. I did fail miserably at completing novels throughout those years. My teenage years, man, if I had a dollar for every novel that I started writing and failed, I'd probably have made more during that time than I had as a published author. But I think that's really the path that I was on. And I'm here now.
I'm fascinated by songwriters. There's something about taking 3 minutes or so, and maybe a couple of hundred words at most, and really just taking over someone's emotions, in that short amount of time, and the ability to. With a mixture of words and melody and things like that, to take someone somewhere. How do you feel like songwriting is similar to writing long form fiction? And is there any crossover between those two skills?
Well, it's interesting because in Brother Dust, the book that Aaron and I just released a month ago, chapter 8, there's a psalm that one of the characters kind of writes, and it was interesting because Aaron came up with the idea to do it, and then he sort of passed it on to me, and I kind of wrote a song in it, and so for me that has transferred over really well. The thing that I hate is that with writing long, a novel or even a short story, you don't get to dictate the way that the reader reads what you've written. You do everything in your heart, everything you could possibly do to inspire them toward reading the way that the song. You control the phrasing, you control the timing, you control everything, and you can elicit emotion out of your listener, or that you can't do with writing a book. And so I don't know all the ways that it translates from one to another, but I definitely think that there's some areas. I think about Nick Cole, who I think we're all in relationship with. The guy writes poetically everything that he ever writes, and I think that if Nick would pick up a guitar, he'd probably be a pretty dang good songwriter as well.
Yeah. I think that's true. There's we can talk about that more later about the songwriting and storytelling, but they're both storytelling. Right. It's what when you start splitting the hair is I like what you said that when you write a song or perform a song, you can lead people there. Whereas if you're a novelist, you have to rely on other things that you're hoping is bringing them along in the same way.
I mean, everything. Book cover, I'm a book cover artist as well. And like, I think I probably finished the book cover before the book is even done, because I do. I love to be able to see the story that we're writing, and it creates the emotion that Aaron and I can pull from. I hope at least that's how it works for me, so that we can get the right emotion across in the book. It's like, here's what we're trying to achieve. This is the first thing that everybody's going to see. Now let's capture that emotion in the writing of the book as well.
Yeah. I'm an armchair cover artist only for my own stuff. I would never do it for someone else, but I at least prototype things for myself. Maybe I'll get someone else to do it, finally, but I'm the same way. I'll open up Photoshop and I'm like, I want to get a certain vibe and a certain feeling and see what sort of subtext I can come up with in the visual. And those things absolutely inform the storytelling. I love that you guys do that.
And that superhero book that we're writing, the only reason that we're doing it, Hank, is because I had an idea for a book cover.
Oh, there's got to be words that
was it. I had this vision to do this thing, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I need to either write a novel or find a bunch of schmucks that want to write with me.
Right. Oh man, Aaron, what about you? What has been your path to getting where you are now?
I always considered myself a writer, and it really, I hate working. Like I hate jobs, and kind of like Steve, like I've got just a stupidly long resume of just useless jobs I did over the years and just didn't enjoy. But the one thing I always enjoyed was writing. It was my dream all along was I want to get paid to write. I never asked to get paid much. I just wanted to get paid a little. And I sort of just pursued it as much as I could after high school. And I ended up almost just by luck, which at this point in my life, I would say it was God.
Yeah.
At the time, I would say luck. But I was walking down the street one day, and I came across a newspaper. And I liked it. It sounded interesting. It was a little community newspaper. And so I called them up, and I ended up getting hired, and I worked for 10 years as a community journalist. And so really during that time, just also worked on my fiction. And I've self-published a lot of books. And so my path always was going this direction. I just never had really the true follow-through to do the hard things. To me, writing a novel is the easiest thing in the world. I'll write one in 2 weeks. Now, editing a novel and making it good, I've never in my life done that until Brother Dust with Steve. I thought you wrote the first draft, and then you edit it for grammar, and then you released it for your adoring fans. And the weirdest thing happened. I would do that, and then like the fans, like I guess they just forgot or they weren't there. But so really, like as far as storytelling goes, it's always been a part of me. I mean, like I said, from those elementary days and in the little closet, in the elementary school, and coming up through high school, and I did some poetry, and I've always done reviews. I've been a movie critic, video game critic, all that stuff, and used to review comic books for a website, for a long time. So writing in one form or fashion was always a part of my life, and it's really just getting to a point where you're mature enough and committed enough to not just do it, but to do it well and do the hard things that come after the fun things that we've sort of arrived at now for me. So
how do we arrive at the point where Hall and Beaulieu are a writing team? How do you guys know each other, first off?
Well, Steve and I go to the same church where Steve's a pastor, and that's how we met. I'd been going there for a while, probably about 6 months, I think, and I ran into Steve in the hallway one day after church, and it was just kind of a funny story. Steve says, "Do you play bass guitar by any chance?" I don't know, and I'm like, "I actually do. Like, why would you ask me this?" And there was kind of a need on the worship team, which Steve's the worship pastor, and so the next day I was on stage playing bass, which I hadn't played in like 12 years, so I was very rusty.
Oh wow!
But through that, just a friendship formed. And And Steve kind of, if you want to pick up, because Steve sort of initiated the writing.
Well, I went over to his house one day to play on the Oculus Rift. I don't even understand how that happened because I have a wife and a kid, and I can't imagine that my wife was just like, yeah, go play video games at that dude's house. But apparently I ended up there, and after I was sufficiently nauseated from trying to play the racing game where you like feel like you're actually in that stinking car, I got up and I don't know, I think I wandered into Aaron's room and I saw some books on the shelf that he had written. And, of course, I knew he was a writer, but I didn't really know a whole lot at that point. I'd never read a word that he'd written. And he said, hey, go ahead and take this home and read it and let me know what you think. And on the way out, you're going to hear me say things like this a lot. First of all, I'm a Christian, and second of all, I'm a pastor. When God starts speaking to me, if I don't listen, it could be bad. And so as I'm walking out the door, I really felt like God was saying, you need to write a book with him. And there's terror in that for me because, A, I've tried to write so many books and failed to complete them. And B, I'd never read a word this dude has written. And, our relationship was based almost at that point solely upon the worship ministry at church. And if he sucked and I said he sucked, then we were going to have an interesting relationship on stage. So I said, let's write a book together. And he said, I'm down. Let's do it. And I said, so what are we writing? He said, I don't know. I pitched him a comic book that I had written a couple of years ago. And I was coloring it at the time. And my artist just he went off to the military and that project just fell apart. And it was Brother Dust. So I pitched him the idea, and he loved it. And I think the next day he had a chapter written, 4,000 or 5,000 words on 6 panels in the comic book, and that was like the moment I realized, oh, this is going to work. But I do remember I went home and he gave me a book called Black Badge, which is a book that he wrote. It's a kind of a police thriller type of thing. And I was laying in bed, and my wife was, of course, in bed with me, and I looked up and I'm like, this guy needs an editor. And that's what I do more than anything. I think that most of my writing in Brother Dust was just incredibly in-depth editing. Of course, I wrote a lot into it as well, but what I pretty much did was just edited the crap out of everything, rearranged sentences and sentence flow and things like that. And, I don't know if that's saying more than I've done or less than I've done. But
that's less. Yeah, you wrote quite a bit. But.
So I think that's where the whole thing started. And at some point, both of us went, well, we write really well together. And I feel like he completes me as an author. So we just decided this Hall and Beaulieu thing was going to be everything that we did was going to have the Hall and Beaulieu treatment, so to speak. And so, eventually Aaron might decide that he's way better than me and go off and do his own thing, and I'd be okay with that. But it's working, man. It's just working really well. Yeah.
So I have never co-written with anyone to the level that you guys have. For a fact, most writers are a little egotistical. It's kind of like politicians. To want to have the job that politicians have, you have to be a little crazy and a little
power hungry,
egotistical, power hungry. I was trying to be diplomatic.
Yeah, I'm not. Political correctness.
Yeah. So, and to be a writer, you kind of have to think that you have something worth saying. And I think we all, my words are wonderful. Everyone should read my words. I will change the world, kind of thing. And then when you partner with someone in the way that you guys have, number one, that has to be very humbling to offer your words to someone else and say, would you like to mutilate my words and add to them and, take some away and hopefully make mine better and, all of that sort of thing. So first off, other than then the mechanics of writing a book together and how you share duties and all of that stuff. Maybe the thing I'm more interested in is what is that feeling like of sharing words together? I know I'm going all around the question because I can't find the words that I want to use. But you're co-creating. What is that process like of learning to trust each other and sharing those responsibilities?
For me,
did that make sense?
Yeah,
at all?
It did actually. For me, like there's a very interesting dynamic that emerged in it for me, and really like there's a safety in it for me because I know that Steve's behind me. So if I put something out that's terrible, one of Steve's greatest qualities, and depending on who you ask, maybe they'll say one of his worst qualities, is he'll text me 5 minutes later and be like, yeah, that wasn't good. Or this paragraph was decent, but then after that you completely lost it. So there's like a deep, like I can just create and write and trust that if it's not up to par, if it's not good enough, that he's going to catch it and help me make it good enough. And really like, I think we're, I don't know if maybe it comes out of like our faith and like the church, but like there's a level of, we kind of try to live our lives as servants in a very humble way. And so I've never really had an issue when Steve says something's not quite right or do it again or let's go a different direction, because I trust like in the friendship and like the bond we have that he would never say that because of any other reason than he wants it to be the best it can be. And he knows I feel the same way if I speak against something he's written. So for me, like I just love it. It's almost like having I just come back to that word. There's always a safety there for me. And I tended back when I was younger, I would lose myself in writing. When I was working on a project, that would become my identity, and I would, you'd almost lock yourself away and ignore people, and I would ignore, God and my faith and stuff like that. And I mean, when you're partnered with a pastor, like one of the things you can rely on is he's also going to spiritually help me to not lose my way and get too caught up in the wrong things or whatever. So for me, I think that's, instead of any negatives, like it's all positives in my mind. So yeah, I don't know, Steve, you've got.
I just think for me, every form of writing that I've ever done relied upon other people. Songwriting, I play just about every instrument, but I don't play about every instrument that well. And so as a guitar player, yeah, I could write guitar stuff, but I always needed a drummer to write the drumming parts. I always needed to trust other musicians, bass players, piano players, whatever it was. I always needed to trust somebody else with something that I created. And so that carried on even to pastoring. I'm always subject to the Holy Spirit, God saying, that's not it. And I could study for 4 or 5 hours to prepare a message that I'm going to give, this week, next week, whatever. But when it comes down to it, if I feel like there's any reason that needs to change, I need to be completely submitted to the fact that that's not what I'm doing. And so that carried over into writing as well. If I write something, and I also have the grand benefit of hating everything that I do.
He does.
I mean, it's been that way since forever. I hate my voice. I hate this. I hate that. Everything that I do, singing, whatever, I've always relied on other people to tell me whether it was good or bad. And so everything that I write, I submit to Aaron with the concept in mind that it was the worst thing ever written by man. And if he comes back with anything positive to say, I'm thrilled. I'm like, it was okay. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't, you sure? This part was pretty bad, right? And so there may be a lot of ego in writing, but I personally don't think that anyone should hear anything that I have to say unless it's inspired by God. And so it's easy for me to just go, here, Aaron, take this and make it better, please.
You really do have like a reverse ego when you write. He'll send me stuff and like with the caption on it, probably the worst thing I've done yet.
A little self-loathing works into humility, so that's good. That's good. And that's exactly the response I expected and hoped for from you guys. So I love that. I love that this partnership was born out of your relationship, and several of the folks I've interviewed that are writing partners. It seems like because this is such an intimate thing. I'm sure there are plenty of successful partnerships that have come out of people that barely know each other, but there's something transcendent that happens when you have a relationship that then evolves into this, and then the words become something that's so much more, and the story becomes special because it's coming from a place where the two of you know each other, and you're trusting each other, and you know that you're there for each other's mutual benefit. So aside from that, kind of what are the mechanics of writing together? Like, do you guys brainstorm together? Who starts it, and then how do you pass it back and forth?
I think that each project has been different. Brother Dust was my brainchild as a comic book, but Aaron ended up writing primary on it. It's kind of a term we use. I don't know if anyone else uses it, but we have a primary author and a secondary author in every project that we do. And the primary author's job is the way that we do it is Aaron will write a chapter and then send it over to me, and I'll write into the chapter, which is also a form of editing. So by the time the first draft of the book is done, it's already been given a second draft and an edit. And so, of course, there's still more after that. Brother Dust, I read that book 8 times, and I hate the book now, although it's phenomenal. It's an amazing book. You should buy it. It's great. But, I always go back to Stephen King's words. If you don't hate the book by the time you're done with it, then you didn't spend enough time on it.
Right. And
so Aaron wrote primary on it, but we brainstormed at least weekly on that. And it went from 140,000 word novel down to 115,000 words by the time it was done. We just had to, kill our darlings and just shred a whole bunch of pages that they were great, they were good, but they just didn't do much to push the story forward. And all they really did was make it a longer book that people would have to endure. And of course, I say that. I almost want to take that word back, but I don't, because I find myself reading books, and if they're too long, although I might love them, I feel like at some point I'm enduring them. I want to know what happens at the end, but there's very few books, I think, that are the 400-page, 500-page books that I think of Orson Scott Card. Man, I love the guy, but I wish he'd freaking kill some words every now and then just so I don't have to go through so many words to get somewhere. And
that's a typical problem with fantasy, right. Epic fantasies, that people have come to expect, 150, 200, 300, 400,000 words, and sometimes we just get, diarrhea of the mouth. It just goes on and on and on.
I wanted to read Song of Ice and Fire again. I wanted to read Game of Thrones again, and I picked it up the other day, and it just felt like I was carrying a 30-pound weight, and I went, you know what? There's other books. There's just other books.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is the premise of Brother Dust? We've kind of talked all around it, but what is this book?
Oh, elevator pitch, man. I don't know if either of us are great at this.
I'm horrible at it. So don't take your time.
Well, we call it a space opera for fans of superheroes and vile villains. I'm a Marvel DC junkie, and so when I originally, like I said, when I approached this, it was a comic book, 100% through and through. He was a superhero to some extent or another. So the idea is that this guy, Brother Dust, is born on a planet that is being siphoned for core energy, and he's born at a time when when the planet is being destroyed. And during his birthing process, his mother dies suffocating in this sandstorm. He actually dies suffocating in this sandstorm. But he kind of comes back to life unexpectedly. And in doing so, he has these powers where he's never fully man and he's never fully dust. He can sift in and out of those two forms back and forth. And so he has dust powers, so to speak. You kind of think of maybe Sandman from Spider-Man, only not as lame, I hope. Hopefully. And so he's now on a new planet with the Solovats, which are his people, half of his people, really. He's half-bred. And the Solovats are doing the same thing to a new planet, Dastropian. The Dastropian people, I should say, are being kind of crushed under the foot of the Empire. And the Solovat Empire always comes in and promises riches and greatness. And they do deliver to some point, but at the expense of the planet itself. And so Brother Dust has just had enough of watching innocent people die for the glory of Solovat. The core energy of each planet is sent back to the planet Solovat to keep the planet alive. And he's just done with it, and he rises up, and he ends up meeting up with a kind of a rebellion called the Resurgence, and they're trying to do the same thing. It's made up of some Solovats and some Dastropians, which are insectoid creatures. And so he teams up with them, and that's kind of where the story begins, and it's a fight against the Solovats.
Aaron, when Steve handed you the story, because you took, even though it was his early creation, you kind of took primary over it and shaped it a lot into what it is now. What was your thinking when you got this, and did you get a vision for the story immediately?
My first move number one, was I created a new character, and that wasn't to try and like take away some sort of ownership, but it was because I was sort of stepping into this world from an outside place, and I sort of felt like I needed to discover it through a character. And just like that worked for me, I felt like it would work for the readers. And so my original idea was that this fresh character would be kind of a main character and would almost be the main character. And, for anyone that's going to read the book or has read the book, that character ended up being named Tristane. And he's a great character, but he kind of has his place in the supporting cast maybe. But that was kind of my first – that allowed me to feel a sense of ownership because there was almost this feeling of not wanting to walk in and play with the other kids' toys, like you walked in and you looked around, but I was like, I don't want to break anything. But if I'm doing it through this new creation, this new vessel, that allowed me to sort of plant my flag in it a little bit. And then from there, as we started brainstorming, you quickly learn with Steve, there's very few things I've ever given. I come up with really weird ideas sometimes, and he's usually just like, yeah, okay, let's try it, So from there, it really wasn't that difficult to start developing it from its comic book form, because it was very comic booky. Well, it was a comic book. I mean, that's kind of a goofy thing to say, but I almost had a different vision of the story than Steve in a way, because I never saw it as a comic book story. I always looked at it from almost like a war novel, and so it was kind of a really cool melding of those two approaches to it that led us to what we ended up with. I don't know if I answered the question well.
So Steve saw it as a comic book. You saw it as kind of more military sci-fi, maybe?
Yeah, and there was almost it was fun. It was funny. The script was sort of funny. The comic book script was a little snarky, and it had almost like a teenager type attitude to it that would have worked perfect as a comic book. And I saw the character much darker than the comic book version, and I think that darker take on his character kind of informed my vision for the world and how this kind of outsider, lonesome character would approach the world. And so, yeah.
Well, we've realized that we have to create, I mean, I think everybody that ever writes a book feels this way, but you almost have to create a new genre for your book.
Yeah.
We didn't know exactly where to place it. It's action, it's adventure, it's sci-fi, it's superhero. But we realized that I realized I really wish there was a science fantasy genre. As a matter of fact, we had a harsh critique the other day, and
We did.
he made the comment that it's science fantasy, and I got frustrated and angry because the critique that or the review that we were given didn't necessarily review what the guy read. He reviewed what he wanted to read, and I think we see that quite a lot. He complained that it was like a Marvel comic book. But he bought a book out of a superhero genre. And so I don't know if he was expecting, a sci-fi military. It's not. There's not a whole lot of science in it. We don't make believe that we know what we're talking about a whole lot. We created a world that felt enough like Earth that we didn't need to over-explain the things that were going on. We hoped that the reader would just enjoy the action and the fun and kind of, what you experience when you read a comic book. I'm a comic book junkie, and I don't want you to explain everything that I'm seeing. I don't need to know why the what is it called, the Tri-Harrier. I don't need to know why that can actually sustain itself in the air. It's like a ship the size of a country. Like, I don't need to know. Just assume that I can be okay with it.
Right. Add a little hand wavy on
it. Whatever.
It's all good. It's all good. You recently put out a book called In Your Closet and In Your Head. Steve, I believe you were the main editor on that, and you guys have co-written the story for that as well. First off, where did this book come from, and tell me about the story that you guys offered.
There's two stories. I'm going to let Aaron tell about the two stories that we wrote. I'll talk on the project itself. I'm not a Metallica fan at all, but I had this idea. I wrote a 1,000-word monster story that I was just calling Riff Raff, and I wrote it for our blog. We do a thing, or we used to do a thing. We haven't in quite a while, but we used to do this thing where we would do a wild card Wednesday where Aaron would give me something to write about and I would give him something to write about, and we'd have 1,000 words to make it a good story. And he gave me a birthday cake, I think was actually the wild card word. And I ended up writing this super morbid story about some monster that broke into a kid's house and tried to poison him with a birthday cake. And I just really liked the story. And I wanted to use it somehow, and so I contacted. It started with Nick Cole. I contacted Nick, and I said, "Hey, I'm doing a short story anthology," and I said it like that. Meanwhile, I wasn't doing a short story anthology. I was trying to do a short story anthology. I had no idea what I was doing. To this day, I don't know what I'm doing with anything.
Wait, are you encouraging the fake it till you make it?
Yeah, man, absolutely. Positive confession, right? You speak positively, you speak things that are not as though they were. It's biblical.
That's what I've been doing on this podcast for 3 years. So I'm almost as good as.
Hey, 180 episodes is nothing to scoff at, dude. So I contacted Nick and I said, "Hey, I'm writing a monster anthology. What would it take to get you to be a part of it?" And Nick has been instrumental in our careers so far. Nick, I can't talk more highly about him. I doubt he's going to listen because he's an incredibly busy guy, but I can't speak highly enough about Nick Cole. He offered to just work on this thing with us, and he introduced me to guys like Michael Bunker, and Michael Bunker then introduced me to Kevin G. Summers. And it kind of just spitballed from there. I think Kevin told me about Matt Herron, and so we compiled this group of phenomenal indie authors, and they wrote some of the most amazing short stories I've ever read. Jason Onspach, man, Jason's a good friend of mine now too. Jason's story in there is 11,000 words of gold. It's longer than any short story in there, but it's brilliant and it's gold, and it needs to be a novel. And so I don't like Metallica, but I couldn't pass up In Your Closet and In Your Head. I was telling all of the authors, write about a monster or write about, a real monster, or write about the monsters in your head. And Kevin G. Summers took that to heart, and he wrote. We put his story at the final position in the book, and that was because it was so strong. Especially as a pastor, I don't want to give anything away, but as a pastor, I was brought to tears in this story. It's a story about head demons, and it was like when I got to the end of it, I was literally crying in my office reading this thing, and in the end, the anthology just blew me away, and it made me want to just do more and more. As a pastor, there's two things I love doing, and that's working with people and writing. And this combines both of those two things.
The topic of this anthology really. I'm sorry, Aaron. I completely skipped over you about what the stories are. We'll get to those in just a second, I promise. But I feel like I need to ask this. As a person who was raised in the Deep South and in a very fundamentalist Christian environment, and we were at church every time the doors are open, and my faith has evolved from that place, and where it's more my own and not what I inherited from my parents. Like I think we all go through that journey. But when I was growing up, it was I was born in 1971, so my teenage years were the early to mid 1980s, and that we had the big Dungeons and Dragons scare and the satanic metal music and all that, and everything was bad. And we avoided everything that was, that could corrupt us, and everything with any dark symbolism or anything like that. When I began writing, I started realizing that digging into some darker things can not only be cathartic for the writer, but can allow you to communicate things to the reader that you just can't any other way. And sometimes you have to deal with topics that you don't like, and that might be scary and that might be unsettling. So as a person of faith, as people of faith, Steve and Aaron both, how do you approach topics that are hard while maintaining your faith and your worldview?
Well, I believe you have to start with, did God create us? Of course, my answer, and I believe your answer is yes, God created us. And God created us with an imagination. He created us with the ability to come up with scenarios in our heads. He gave us the gift of writing, and he gave us the gift of storytelling. And I don't necessarily think there's a whole lot that's off limits. I play Dungeons and Dragons. I play video games. I love role-playing, and I love reading things, and if they're dark, they're dark. That's great. It doesn't bother me a whole lot. There are some things that I believe there's the difference between having a religious view of life and having a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
When you have a relationship with anyone, I could use my wife as the example, and Hank, I believe you're married. I hope this speaks to you as well. My wife doesn't ever need to tell me what she wants me to do and what she doesn't want me to do. I've been with her for 12 years. I know at any moment in my life that doing the dishes will make her happy. She doesn't have to ask me.
Sure.
I don't need a list of do's and don'ts from her to know how to make her happy. And so with Jesus, I believe the relationship is the same. We don't need a list of do's and don'ts if we actually know who he is as a person. And so when I begin to get involved with things that I know will displease him or separate me from him in any way, I know that. I don't have to question, am I allowed to do this? It's kind of those old "what would Jesus do" bracelets. The only way you actually know what Jesus would do is if you know Jesus. And so those "what would Jesus do" bracelets don't work unless you know him, because otherwise you're just thinking of what the moral compass that you have inside of you would do and not actually what Jesus would do. And so if at any point during our writing I feel like something is just too much, Aaron's the same way. We'll go, this is too much. We've taken a stand. We don't swear. As a matter of fact, there have been a dozen times where I've called Aaron or he's called me. Like, this story needs the F word, or this story needs this. And we know that that is actually the exact thing that needs to be spoken by that character in order to elicit the emotion that we're trying to get out of the reader. But the two of us have just decided that's just something that we're not going to cross over into. And so it's not because we are afraid of, the big bad Jesus coming down. It's because we love Jesus and we don't want to see – we don't want to use the gift that he's given us in a way that would displease him in any way.
Well, and for me, when it comes, I tend to almost always write about dark things.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's for me to write a happy story is a rarity. But to me, like there's darkness in the world. Like it would almost be being like dishonest if the only stories I wrote were about like perfect living Christians who were happy and their life was perfect. There's just no one can really relate to that. But I mean, people can relate to being lost and to being worried or to being scared so for me, like it's almost a way to just explore the world and to see it as it is, but also like how you work characters through, like Brother Dust. Like we didn't go into it with any agenda at all. Like we didn't talk about any overall themes or anything like that. But then I'll go back and read it, and I see things about almost like a struggle with faith and these ideas of what is belief and the desire to believe in anything. It comes out in a really interesting way through a character that's constantly doubting. And that's maybe not what you would expect from two kind of sold-out Jesus guys like we are, but it's also something that I know a lot of people can relate to. So that wasn't an intentional thing at all. That was just how the character turned out to be. And I love going back and reading it and seeing that exists. And I feel like if we had some sort of rule like, well, we can't have anybody that doesn't worship Jesus, we never would have had that moment that could maybe connect to someone or speak to them. So I agree with Steve. Like I'm not scared of dark things. To me, are just part of life. I mean, especially as a believer, it doesn't mean you're not going to run into dark things or problems or issues. You just are maybe a little better equipped to handle them and work through them and stuff. So
we had a conversation, Aaron and I, last night about a kind of a novella that we're working on. It's called No God on Mars. And it's about a guy that's struggling with the fact that he just doesn't believe in this God that his parents believe in. And I wrote this dialogue, really more of a monologue, where he is just ripping into God and faith, and through that, I can't avoid the fact that those are things that even as a pastor, even as a believer, throughout my life, I've had moments where we think about David in the Bible, Job in the Bible. David, man, he ripped on God a lot, but in the end, he always said, but you're God and I'm not, and I have to trust you. Here's how I really feel. I wish you would have done this. I wish you would have done that. I don't know why you did it the way that you did it. I think it's stupid that you did it the way that you did it, but you're God and I'm not, and I have to trust you. And so as writers, we're able to allow some of the things that we have been through in our lives to come out onto paper and be able to share why we've overcome those things. Even, Brother Dust, you're not going to read it and get anything Jesus out of it.
No,
as a matter of fact, as a pastor, I think a lot of the church members maybe bought it expecting there to be some Christian something or other. Man, it's a lot of death and gory mayhem.
Yeah, it is.
And so when, little old church lady comes up and says, I'm reading your book, part of me goes, crap, don't read my book. It's not what you think it's going to be at all. But anyway, I hope that answered the question.
That's a fantastic answer. And faith and doubt, to me, are two different sides
Absolutely.
of the same coin, and that the tension between those is where humanity resides. And no matter how you approach faith, there's always that tension in there, and that humanity is where those stories connect.
Well, I think that's where, if I could just interject one last time, I know we're running out of time a little bit, but I think that's one of those areas where people who don't believe in God, don't believe in Jesus, tend to struggle with, because they assume that those of us who believe are just these naive people who have never truly considered life. And I'm not trying to generalize. I mean, I have friends that are atheists. As a matter of fact, I'm writing a book right now with a guy that's an atheist, and I'm not generalizing on purpose, but we don't just jump into our faith in Christ naively and blindly. If we didn't have doubts, then I would be on their side. I would be like, you know what, you just have never considered what life is really about. But the fact that we could admit that there are things that we don't understand and we wish were different, I think that's what grounds a believer, instead of just making them some crazy naive, person without a seatbelt on.
Nice.
Aaron, so tell us about the stories in your closet and in your head, the two that you guys featured.
Sure thing. The first is called The Farmer's Daughter. For some reason, I thought I was going to get the name of that wrong. The Farmer's Daughter. I remember what it's called.
Yes, you did.
And it's actually it's a story of an older guy, and he's a farmer, and he's going to take his last great harvest across the stars to this big market and sell it off and retire. And to help him do so, he's installed what we call a ship brain. And it's an artificial intelligence that kind of runs your ship and does everything for you. And the cool thing is, this is actually a continuation of a universe we started with a short story called Sparkle Shipshine, which we placed in an anthology early in our career and have since released on our own. And about this ship brain that doesn't quite function correctly, and terrible and horrific things generally happen when the ship brain is involved. And so that story plays on the idea of a monster in a couple of ways, how people can become monsters, and then it kind of has a literal monster in it too, I guess. So that's our first story in that. And then our second one is called A Good Old-Fashioned Murder. And Steve spoke a few minutes ago about that short story he wrote with that character called Riff Raff and the Poisoned Birthday Cake. So the idea, Steve handed that one to me while he worked primary on Farmer's Daughter, and he said, expand on this one a little bit. And I was struggling with it, and I kind of, to break out of the struggle, my thought was, what are like the craziest things I can do? Like maybe I'm just limiting so I just decided to unleash imagination on this thing. And to this day, I'm not positive it's a good story, but I know it's an imaginative one. And, I mean, I know it's very inventive, and like some of the stuff in there is just so wild and out there that I can't help but love it. And that one really tells the story of this monstrous little assassin who his favorite things in the world are murder and garbage. And he gets this assignment to travel through time and kill someone who, if it doesn't get killed, is going to go on to be an evil emperor and possibly ruin the whole universe. And it follows his sort of misadventures, his misadventures in murder. There you go. It's a good tagline. Hey. You should remember that one. No one steal that. That's
somebody called it. Somebody said that Riff Raff was Sully's like evil counterpart, Sully from Monsters Incorporated.
Nice. I can see that.
Oh, I love it.
And so that's that one. We sort of, and then I handed that one back to Steve, and he got to do his thing on it. And that's one of the fun things about how we did this anthology is we each sort of did our own thing on a story, and then we passed them to each other and had a chance to do an edit and then write into it ourselves and kind of put our mark on it as well. It was a really fun thing we did with that. I enjoyed it a lot. But those are our two entries in that one.
Which is the same thing we're doing with the superhero supervillains thing.
Yeah.
I wrote the supervillain story, and Aaron is writing the superhero story, and then when all is said and done, I'm going to take his story, he's going to take my story, and we're going to butcher each other's
Mess them up? That's what I was going to say.
I can't wait to see all the stories that come in for that.
I am in it.
Yeah, I'm offering a story for it. That's it's starting to take shape.
And
now.
your son Ian is writing.
And my son Ian also. Yep, is as soon as he finishes finals next week. He's going to get his finished, and yeah, this is going to be super fun. I need to get you guys back when that book releases, and let's talk superheroes more because we are completely out of time today. But it has been so much fun talking to you guys. So Brother Dust is out now. I've read about half of it, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. In Your Closet, in Your Head, I have skimmed through it, and with the names attached to it, I don't think anybody needs to be convinced. This is a fantastic collection of stories. I am now fans of Hall and Beaulieu, and I can't wait to see what you guys get up to next. It has been a great privilege to get to talk to you both and to now call you my friends. Steve and Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Hank. Appreciate it.
Yeah, where can everybody find you other than your Amazon pages that I'll link up in the show notes? But are you guys kind of home basing on the web anywhere where people can get plugged in with you and follow you?
HallandBeaulieu.com.
HallandBeaulieu.com.
Yeah, Beaulieu. Okay. Just pronounce it how you want. We're on Facebook, Hall and Beaulieu. We're on Twitter, Hall and Beaulieu. Hall_Beaulieu on Twitter. The Monster Anthology is actually 99 cents today only, and Brother Dust is currently 99 cents as well. So you can jump on Amazon and snag those up and snag up some short stories and all of that. And we love to talk to any readers, whether you like us or not. Yeah. So please message us, tell us what you think, even if it's brutal, because we're pretty brutal people too. So anything you've said, we've probably already said.
True,
so.
Yeah.
But you'll take it with a smile.
Absolutely.
So yeah. Steve and Aaron, thank
you
so
Hank.
much for coming.
Appreciate it.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves. Pick up the entire Jason Crane series. Link in the show notes.
The year was 1834. The month was December. I was 14. Irving's tale was by then well known. The characters of Brom Bones and the beauteous Katrina were widely understood in town to refer to my parents. Rumors persisted. I heard the name of Headless Horseman whispered. My father dismissed all these tales, calling them malicious. Yet more than once I saw him and my mother scanning Agatha's face across the supper table, finding only a secret smile and a look of defiance. I found the rumors fascinating. I followed Agatha like a pup, waiting for her to cast some magic spell. And one day she did. The household servants had set a fire in the hearth for her comfort, and she sat close to it, counting out small gold coins upon a lapboard. I hid in the shadows, hoping she might drop a coin and I could retrieve it for myself. One of her servants, a West Indian girl, carried a snowy log into the room and set it on the fire. It began to hiss and pop, the snow melted, and the fire sputtered out. Agatha cursed as I had never heard her do before. She stood, spilling all the gold, and slapped the idiot girl across the face. The girl ran, and my grandmother muttered to herself, searching for match and tong to no avail. When she was not looking, I crept forward and took for myself one of the gold pieces. Then something remarkable occurred. My grandmother sighed, knelt before the fireplace, reached for the logs, and her right hand caught a fire. Flame blossomed and coiled about her wrist. I gasped and cried out, "Shh! Don't be afraid, my Dylan." "Your hand!" She raised her palm. Flame sat cupped in it, casting the shadow of her fingers upon the ceiling and walls. "Lock the door," she said. I obeyed. She pointed to the floor, and I sat, waiting breathlessly. "This is the Van Brunt gift. It will be your gift as well, soon, and your children's forever afterwards." "Why does it not burn you?" I asked. "Why should it? Do I deserve to be burned?" "No." "Then I am safe from the fire. Do you deserve to be burned, my Dylan?" I shook my head. "Show me." I reached for the flame and took it. I pulled back at once, crying out with pain, wagging my fingertips. The fire caught my sleeve. I could not rid myself of it, as if I clutched burning tar. The pain intensified. The blisters broke, and a rivulet of lymph ran down my arm. "Your conscience knows, Dylan. You deserved to be burned. Say it." "I deserved to be burned," said I. "Again." "I deserved to be burned." She turned her palm. "The gold piece." I nodded and brought the stolen coin from my pocket. She took it and raised it to the light. "You cannot wield the flame with guilt in your heart, son. Try, and it will devour you. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Then Brunt should not be so weak." "I'm sorry I took the gold, Grandmother. I'm sorry I was bad. Don't be ashamed of me." She frowned and laid the gold coin on her lapboard. She shook her head sadly. "I'm not ashamed that you took the gold. I'm ashamed that you felt the guilt."
You've been listening to the Author Stories podcast with Hank Garner. You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. When you're there, please subscribe to the show and leave a comment over on